Before we begin, think of one word your student can recognize but still hesitates to use. The gap between understanding and use is the focus of Teng's 2024 study. With 93 young beginners, it examines how input, output, and working memory influence vocabulary recognition, production, and retention. Why compare input and output? The author explains that input helps learners connect word forms with meanings, whereas output requires active production, repetition, and refinement. A picture book and a role play therefore place different demands on a young learner. Yet, previous research had minimally explored how young EFL beginners learn through these tasks, especially in relation to working memory. The study therefore directly asks a practical question. What helps children understand, produce, and retain new words, and which learning process supports each outcome? The study asks two questions. First, do input-based and output-based instruction yield different vocabulary outcomes? Second, is working memory correlated with learning gains across these instructional types? These questions organize the presentation. I will first explain what was tested, then text effects, memory and retention, and finally what the results allowed us to reconsider in my classroom. Each section therefore remains tied to one of the study's questions. This was a quasi-experimental study with 93 soon-to-be first graders in southern China, averaging 6.82 years old with minimal prior English. They were divided evenly among input, output, and control groups. Instruction lasted 4 weeks, 2 40-minute lessons per week, and 64 target words. 2 recognition and 2 production tests were administered before, immediately after, and later. Word repetition measured phonological short-term memory. Operation span measured complex working memory. Man-COVA and COVA controlled pretest and memory variables. These learners resemble primary beginners, but the intensive context differs from my classroom. Therefore, I used the findings as a research lens, not proof that my students would show identical effects. The treatments were task packages. Input activities include bingo, fly swat, card finding, and map directions. Output activities include repetition, building towers, King's game, and word wall. Input centered on comprehension and recognition, output centered on production and active use. However, the author warns that texts are difficult to classify strictly. Consider charades. A children listens, interprets, acts, and may produce a word. Is it purely input or output? I treat it as a bridging task, which makes the classroom comparison more accurate. Now, the first research question. Table 1 shows substantial gains in both experimental groups. In multiple choice listening, both experimental groups rose above 40 immediately, while control reached only about 10. In discrete production, both experimental groups approached 30, while control remained near 2. Scores fell at delayed testing, yet experimental groups remained well above control. Tables 2 through 5 confer significant group effects on all 4 measures, with p below 0.001 and partial eta squared values near 0.9 or higher. Crucially, input surpassed output only in multiple choice recognition. The other three measures show no significant difference. That limits the conclusion. The evidence supports combining text types, not choosing one universal winner. For the second question, phonological short-term memory significantly predicts every immediate and delayed outcome. The effect sizes were consistently larger at delayed testing. Complex working memory, however, was non-significant throughout. That does not mean it never matters, it just did not predict outcomes in the study. The delayed pattern suggests that phonological storage may be especially relevant to later retrieval and retention. Together with the decline in Table 1, this supports auditory rehearsal, rhymes, chants, and mnemonic cues, instead of treating one successful performance as lasting mastery. How does this evidence illuminate my teaching project named Our Story? The lesson moves from picture books and flashcards to charades and worksheets, then to group story writing, role play, and performance. The paper supports this blend because both text types improved recognition and production. It also reveals two gaps. First, my reflection records uneven ability with abstract emotion words and difficulty translating ideas into English. Before creative output, I will add echoing, rhythmic repetition, gestures, and rehearsed chunks, aligned with the phonological memory finding. Second, the lesson documents performance, but provides no delayed retention data. I would add picture naming or a mini role play 1 week later. This is my evidence-based adaptation, not an outcome directly tested in the paper. The study supports retaining both text type, while its memory and retention findings show how I could strengthen the sequence. Finally, two limitations matter. Exposure frequency was not controlled, and text could not be classified as purely input or output. And the sample and intensive support also limit transfer. So, one final question for everyone. For young beginners, once you reach input, shift toward active output. And what scaffolds are needed for learners with weaker phonological short-term memory? Thank you.